We are here to listen to unarticulated consumer needs to products that rock. We will be learning about sociocultural anthropology, which is a research approach that is particularly well suited to exploring the deep, unarticulated emotional landscape that drive consumer purchase decisions. When paired with the practice of culinology, product success rates see a vast improvement from today's 70 to 90% failure rates. And I'd like to introduce our two speakers. Number one, who I consider a very close friend, Mark Crowell, is a CRC and is the principal culinologist at Culinex in Seattle, Washington. Culinex is a product development consultancy specializing in clean label development. Mark holds a master's in business administration from Columbia University, a bachelor's of science in hotel restaurant management from Florida International University, and a degree in culinary arts from the Culinary Institute of America. And we'd like to introduce also Michelle Berry, who is president in Centric Brand Anthropology, CEO and president of Centric Brand Anthropology. Michelle Berry Centric specializes in consumer research, product innovation, and experience design. Michelle holds a PhD in sociocultural and medical anthropology from University of Washington, an associate of applied arts and visual communications from the Art Institute of Seattle. She's on the advisory board of the Women's Choice Awards. So please welcome them, and let's have a great session.
Well, good morning, everybody. How was dinner last night? Pretty good. Well, excellent. Well, I've been coming to these RCA events for probably the past 17 years or so, and you have a real treat in store for you today. I managed to wrangle Michelle to come from Seattle down here to speak, and I don't think in that 17 years that I've ever had heard a session at RCA about the subject you're about to hear about. So I hope you find this interesting. Michelle and I have had the great pleasure working. I've had the great pleasure working with Michelle over the past 5 years or so, and we really accomplished something for our clients that is worthy, I hope you will feel worthy of being shared with you today. So you'll let us know at the end of the session. But from unarticulated consumer needs to products that rock, that's what we're going to talk about today. And Michelle?
Great, good morning. It's really quiet out there. I don't know about you guys, but I was up late. That's right. As Mark said, we've been working together for a while. We've known each other for a better part of, 12 years or longer. I met Mark when I was one of the principals and the senior vice president of a company called the Hartman Group. And at that time, the Hartman Group specialized in consumer research. And so we did a lot of work in the food world. That was probably 90% of our business was food and beverage. And so after giving a lot of consumer insights and shopper insights, I wanted to start taking it to another level, because consumer insights is usually what people can talk about in terms of a focus group or doing some sort of a survey. It's their way of thinking about it. And what I thought was interesting are the things people can't talk about, because that's where they find more of the kind of deep desires, and you also find some of the more innate needs that are hard for them to even notice or talk about. So our company is not only just a design research company. We have PhD level sociocultural anthropologists like myself. I know it's a mouthful, but basically we study culture. And we combine that with designers, and we have retail, graphic, and industrial designers. And it's an integrated team, because what we're trying to do is understand what the needs are and then design useful products and services around that, and also get into brand, which we'll talk about today. So we do cultural trends, which I'll talk about as well. And I'm going to pass it back to Mark to talk a little bit about what he does, and then we'll start weaving it together for you.
Thanks, Michelle.
Yeah.
Well, what we do is very simple. We make products for clients. So we're in the product development business. The thing that's a little bit different about Culinex is we make products strictly in the organic, natural, non-GMO world. So basically everything that's prohibited on the Whole Foods list, generally speaking, we don't deal with those items in product development. So why Michelle at Centric and Culinex? Besides the fact we're both located in Seattle, Washington, what's cool is there was a natural synergy between what our clients needed and didn't have in a lot of cases in terms of this real understanding of what drives consumer purchase behavior and what Michelle's clients were looking for sometimes in terms of product development expertise. So you put these two things together and you get a much more nose-to-tail type of a set of services for clients. Now, how many are practicing culinologists in the room? I just see a show of hands. How many are actually in the product development business? Okay, good. So, those of you who raise your hands, you have a natural advantage, right? You're bringing together science, art, into culinology, and hopefully that's giving you a leg up. Hopefully your employers or in your own business, you see the advantages of that. What we're going to talk about today is not so much about just product. We're going to talk about something called product experience. And if I could just give you a mental picture for a moment about what the difference is, think of the product as one element of product experience. So product experience is the whole thing that consumers get when they get the product. Michelle really is going to carry the bulk of the conversation today because you guys hear a lot about culinology and product development. You don't need to hear anything more. I'm not going to tell you anything you don't already know about product development. But Michelle's going to tell you about some things you might not know about. You probably intuitively know about those things, but you haven't really explicitly taken a peek under the hood. And she's agreed to share some of what's under the hood with us today. Go ahead and skip forward.
Okay. Those are people we work with. I think the main point on this slide is just we work with startups. I mean, literally people that say, hey, I was just in the rainforest with machetes and I discovered this new ingredient. What do I do with it? I have no money. I don't know who to talk to. What do I do? Clear up through some of the larger food manufacturers as well as retailers and other industry-related folks across the board. So we have a pretty interesting bandwidth of little to giant for many, many years. So as Mark said, our approach is truly integrated. It's very different because what we're looking at is we're trying to understand human behavior and human emotion and human sensory experiences, but we also need to keep that and link that back to the actual ingredients in the product. So the way that we work together is it's a constant dance. We don't say, okay, you go do the research and then come back and we're going to develop a product and then go do some more research and test it and then we'll refine it and we'll do a product. Mark's team from Culinology, they're literally out there with our anthropologists in the field doing ethnographic research. We usually start off in the home, and then we also surround that with a lot of other kinds of research. We have probably 50 different ways of getting at how people are thinking. A lot of it's through observation, and it's sort of different kinds of techniques of conversation that help us get to some interesting insights. I'll talk to you a little bit more about that and what the power of that is for our clients and how we start to get to some more interesting layers. But first, I'm going to start with a white line. I don't know why that's there. I'm going to start with the conversation about culture. For those of you who have this deep need to try and figure out what this has to do with your business for right now, maybe just let it go. Let it wash over you for a little bit, because culture is a really trippy thing. It's that thing that most people can't talk about. We often don't know that it's influencing us, but it's the thing that makes people feel senses of loyalty or pride. It's basically... Think about the way folks feel when they hear the national anthem. It's also what happens in culture that influences behaviors and what certain rules look like. So the idea of smoking, that became culturally a taboo, and it's smoking in the office, and then it was smoking outside. And you start to see how culture starts to dictate what's right, what's wrong, what's good, what's bad, and what we decide to ultimately do, eat, buy. So thinking about culture, there's a huge influence right now. Obviously, it's the economy. We just are coming out of, at least some claim we're coming out of a bit of a recession here. And the economy has a really profound impact on us. When people are feeling broke and feeling kind of lousy about things, there's a couple different ways that American culture responds. In the past, it used to be very much like Rockefeller. It was very utilitarian. You basically got up, you shaved, Everything was buttoned up. You got to work. You got busy. It was very functional. It was very results-oriented. It was very quantitative. It was no nonsense. It was get on, get to work, make some money. There's a different style of influence and culture that's more of the expressive. When the economy's good and people feel they have a little bit of space, all of a sudden they start thinking more about the why. Why am I here? And they start to think more about self-improvement. And it goes from this idea of the external, functional, very results-oriented to something that's more experiential, it's more emotional, and it's more personal. In our culture right now, in the past, if you looked back at the previous recessions, the tendency in American culture was to buckle down and get busy and not to be caring so much about what your purpose was, what the meaning of life was. But now we're starting to see with the new culture, and especially with millennials who are obviously pushing all of us in new directions, they're wanting to do both. They're saying, you know what, I still want things that function. I still want to be productive. I still want a quality product, and they're willing to work hard for it. But they also aren't willing to sacrifice that for things that are emotionally valuable to them and to things that help them express themselves. And so it's creating a really interesting purchase cycle and how they're thinking about what products and brands mean to them. So this group, and this is, again, primarily the millennials, and I'm going to stick with that because what they're doing is they're starting to influence the Gen X group a bit, but moreover, they're influencing the boomers, and the two are having interesting conversations because basically you have moms and daughters and fathers and sons talking, and so they're starting to push everybody in certain directions. One is very much about building community. They're very much into real people getting together, having meaningful conversations. DIY is huge. I'm sure you've been able to discover that across a number of different categories, but especially in food. They like to interact with people. As digital as their lives are, and as much as they're kind of focused into the interactive space, it almost creates a pendulum shift where the more intense technology gets, the more intense the human interactions start to become for them and the more meaningful they become for them. So there's an interesting dynamic that's kind of creating this idea of interacting with people in new ways. They also like to anchor to the past. And what that is, it gives them a sense of grounding. It gives them another sense of meaning. And it's not about nostalgia. They're not trying to go back to a certain way of living because really they don't want to do that. But what they want is it's like a reimagined past. There's a certain pieces of the past that are meaningful to them, and they look for that all around them all the time. And again, they want to buy products made by real people. So all these ideas basically ladder up to a notion of real and meaning. And they do look for that much more so than we've seen in other generations before them. Here's some purchase facts for the millennials. We just did a study a couple months ago, and it was a national online study. We had about 2,500 respondents. And in that study, we were asking some kind of unusual questions to them about how they ascertained the notion of value and what was important to them, where this meaning came from. And what we found was that beyond price, quantity, convenience, even ingredients to a certain extent, brand was the most important product attribute in their purchase decisions. And that was by a pretty large margin, especially for the older millennials, the 30 plus. And then into the Gen X, it was also the same. Trusted brand was the most important decision factor for them when they're doing a purchase. We have never seen that kind of research before. And I've been doing research for 25 years, and I've never seen a study where brand came out on top. So that was a really interesting shift in trends. Secondary to that was packaging material. And it was not just about whether it's an aluminum package or a pouch or plastic tray. It wasn't necessarily about the form. It was the total combined attributes of the packaging. So it was everything from the design to the shape to the color, and it needed to align with the ingredients, and it needed to align with the brand. And that's where they start to generate a notion of higher quality and value. Probably most important when you start thinking about the product experience and the brand experience are essentially the same thing. Your products and your brand has to match up. So that overall experience is starting to be benchmarked by those millennials, especially the younger millennials. And I know everyone's heard ad nauseum about the millennials, but the truth is they are looking at the world differently. They are biologically and culturally wired differently than the generations that preceded them. So this is why this stuff is important, because, again, it connects back to the product. So getting off the consumer for just a minute, when we look at how innovation is basically dealt with and how these different folks in the industry are trying to address a more complex consumer base and a more demanding consumer base, what we find is that the entrepreneur approach is kind of kicking ass on everybody else. They are fired up. They're very passionate. They've got a really good sense of what's going on with the experience, the total holistic experience. The problem with them is that they have no idea how to articulate it. They actually don't know the sequence or steps to become successful, so typically they're leaving out 1 to 5 significant aspects of how to launch a product in the marketplace. So we're still seeing a ton of failure. So it's not that they're doing it and getting it right and just killing it in terms of the dollars, but they are killing it in terms of being a source of inspiration and creating really meaningful products. And so this younger group, the millennials, they're seeing this huge proliferation of brands and interesting experiences. And it's not just the consumer that's noticing it, but it's also the larger corporations. For better or for worse, the larger corporations' approach to innovation is still vastly about the numbers. There's a little bit of a crisis, I think, that's going on in the boardrooms right now about how to stop the legacy brands from bleeding. A lot of them are starting to taper off. They're not experiencing the growth that they experienced for years and years and years. So they are keeping their eyes now on the entrepreneur. The idea of let's create some new innovative product, but you're still using the same metrics of it needs to be $100 million in 3 years. It rules out a lot of possibilities, So when we look at the large corporation situation at the moment, it really is not in sync with how consumer behavior is going. And I think we're going to continue to see the legacy brands really drop off unless they can try and figure out how to reinvent themselves. But I'm going to talk a little bit later about their ability to even try and do that. And I'm sorry to the larger companies. We're not against the big companies. It's just it's a bit out of step with the way innovation is working today. There are some companies that are starting to see a difference, and they're starting to recognize the fact that innovation has to change inside, and it needs to be more about the consumer. It needs to be more about an entrepreneurial, passionate, inspired, meaningful way of innovating to get a new product to market that's not just a line extension, and trying to leverage their current capabilities or efficiencies. Kendall Powell from General Mills is one. He had a pretty good quote here. I'll read it. Over the last half dozen years, we've been looking very closely at the entrepreneurs that we compete with, the smaller companies that we compete with, and we've studied in detail how those kinds of small companies develop and bring their products to markets, and we've learned a lot from doing that. Unfortunately, he didn't give us the secret on what they learned and how they're going to implement it. But the point being is that there's a new awakening. There is a consciousness happening that things need to shift. Some companies aren't getting it, and this is a real product. Is anyone missing the meaning here on why this doesn't work? Sorry, Kraft, but Nabisco tried to launch an organic Oreo, totally missing meaning. And I'm going to launch a lot into meaning in just a few minutes here too. But the organic cookie consumer doesn't want an Oreo. The Oreo consumer doesn't want organic cookies. There's a total disconnect between occasion, context, the emotional relevance, the symbolic value of the brand, the heritage of the brand. There are so many things wrong with this that I could literally just dissect this for probably 20 minutes, and I'm tempted to do it right now. But it didn't work. And it was a way of going back to innovation the way innovation used to be, which is let's leverage that brand equity and let's do another line extension because those are the easiest path to plow. It's not. It didn't work, and it's not going to work.
So, look, none of you are going to create a taco town taco. none of you are going to create a organic Oreo cookie either, but we're just trying to make a point, and I think the point's well taken. A lot of this stuff that's going on today is a little bit more subtle, but it's not working. As Michelle alluded to, and the chairman and CEO of General Mills alluded to, large corporations today are going back to school, and they're trying to figure out, what are consumers really concerned about, and what do they want? And it's a big puzzle. It's a huge puzzle right now. A lot of different crosswinds. Is it non-GMO? Is it organic? What's natural? Are we going to get a suit for calling that evaporated cane juice? There's a lot of issues playing out there. I think the point of the midpoint of this presentation is just go back and say, where do we start from? Unarticulated consumer needs, mysteries, these kinds of mysteries, to products that rock. And what Michelle was talking about is, how do you get the experience of the product to align with the product? And our principal concern here as product developers is, we're trying to make great products. That's hard enough. But if we make great products and everything else in that product experience is not aligned, you get these huge misses. I mean, what if you made a great organic Oreo cookie? Who cares? It's never going to be successful. Well, why would we say that to you as a group of product developers, as a group of culinologists, as a community of RCA members? Because we all need to be successful in our product development efforts. And if in our product development efforts a huge, important, key piece of the puzzle is missing, we need to, even if our roles are just product development, we need to say, wait a minute, we know there's something missing. You need to say that to your marketers. You need to say that to your salespeople. You need to say that to your senior executive teams. Wait a minute, there are some gaps here. There are some things that are missing. I know better. So hopefully, if there's anything that you take away from today in this presentation, there's these other pieces. What are they? They are difficult to articulate. I mean, Michelle is really the expert in that area. It's taken me a long time to get my head wrapped around it and working with Michelle and her team. But this is real. This is not made up psychological fluff. Culture is real. So how do we start? When we sit down with a client, we start over on the left-hand side with, what's the product? What's the idea? What is it you're interested in doing? Sometimes clients come to us and they go, I don't exactly know, but I think if we were to do a unbelievable something vegetarian, I think that would be just awesome. Figure that out. I mean, that's just, huge, wide open area. Or they may come and they might say, I want a maple walnut scone, something very, very specific, but it has to be different. It has to be unique. So they might come with something very specific. Whatever it is, we call that trying to find a white space. Whatever you're going to come to us with for a new product, a new category of products, a new business idea, there has to be some sort of white space. And the white space really represents where people are not, where the competition is not yet. If you're going to come and you're going to, try to do an organic Oreo cookie, you're really sailing against the wind. Very, very little likelihood. So we don't want to see failures. We want to see successes. So we say, come with an idea, whatever that is, however specific or general that idea might be, but let's try to find a white space. And then we can develop a strategy around that starts to get us into the product development process. But see, we're not even talking about the product development process itself here. We're pre-concepting. We're pre-ideation. Some examples. Let's talk about 3 categories as examples. This first one is about bars. The second one we'll look at will be about sliced bread. And the third one will be about water. 3 categories. Why did I pick those 3 categories? Each one of those categories is larger than $5 billion. Now, that's a pretty significant piece of business within the overall food scene. They're also, in addition to being very large, they're mature. What are you going to do different? What are you going to do different in bars? What are you going to do different in sliced bread, for God's sakes? What are you going to do different in water? Well, here's 3 examples, each with a brand experience aligned with cool product. Kind, really innovative. New, a line, it was just introduced at Expo West in Anaheim, terrific show if you haven't been, by the way, to see trends a couple weeks ago. Popped. Now you think, okay, popcorn, I know that's kind of hot. They put popcorn into a bar. Well, that's kind of an interesting idea. But that's not what they did. There's some issues with popcorn. It's made of corn. 95% of our corn is GMO. That's a problem. Popcorn actually, would have some other technical issues in putting into a bar. What did they find? They found popped sorghum. They found an ingredient in the United States, largely used in animal feed, and they found it was delicious. And it was the right size. It had the right water activity. They came out with a line. Now notice this is not just a product. We're not just talking about a flavor profile. This is a whole platform. They've got a number of bars in here. And, Michelle will talk more about the brand imagery and everything else that goes into the product experience, but they hit it right. It's a new ingredient. It's non-GMO. It's delicious. And it's the basis of a whole new product platform. Just an example. Sliced bread. Well, whole grains have been around for a long time, but sprouted grains, whole grains 2.0, if you will. Dave's Killer Bread has done a terrific job, launched in Costco 10 years ago. It's grown like crazy. Dave's got a really interesting backstory. The guy actually went to prison. He was sort of an enforcer for small-time criminals. In the area where he grew up, he kind of got his life back together again, taught himself how to make bread. It's a huge business, hugely successful. Sprouted grains, you're seeing a lot of sprouted everything. Just again at Expo West a couple weeks ago in Anaheim, we saw sprouted. I mean, there was all kind crackers sprouted, bread. I mean, every kind of thing you can imagine sprouted. Why sprouted? Okay, it's not just that it's a new ingredient. Sprouted grains have approximately 60% fewer carbohydrates. People are really still trying to cut down on carbs. This whole paleo thing and all protein focus. There's carbs here, but it's in line. It's a lot less than typical bread. It's easier to digest this. People that have some sort of gluten sensitivity might still be able to eat sprouted bread and still enjoy bread. So again, it's finding that white space. Third category, what the heck is this? What could you think of new in the water category that could possibly interest people? This is literally what comes out of the tree, out of the maple tree. Maple water. It's exactly like the way it comes out of the tree. There's very little done to it other than to, I suppose, pasteurize it or Tetra Pak it, aseptic packet. It has a very slight taste of maple. It's not like drinking something really sweet. It's just a very sweet, slight maple flavor. But it's packed with nutrients, antioxidants, polyphenols, vitamins, mineral, 46 different constituents. How could you possibly remake the water category? Maple water. Whoever would have thought about it? Now, is this the only thing? Is this the only white space underwater? Hell no. We've got a few other examples. I'm not sure how to find out what they are. That obviously was not how to do it. Artichoke water, almond water, birch water. There are all these plant-based waters. They're all in the marketplace. Olive water. They're out there. They're out there right now. The water category is getting ready for, water 4.0. After regular water and vitamin water and, coconut water, which was the last big wave of water, you're going to see another wave of water based on these products.
Mark, can I ask a question real quick?
Absolutely.
Why don't they tout some of those benefits on the packaging, polyphenols? Do they not want to confuse people or put too much information on, or maybe
So the question was, why don't they tout the nutritional benefits or, these polyphenols and so forth? It's a great question. And I'm actually going to let, Michelle is going to address it in a little bit. But the short answer is, in some cases, the more you say, the less authentic your product is. You must let the whole language and imagery of your brand communicate to people. It's not words. It's not words. It's this subcontext. People are taking this in. You look at that, you go, pure, clean, simple, trustworthy. Everybody in the room looking at that's going, not even any color on it. But how do you get underneath the hood? How do you figure out what those pieces are? That's really Michelle's expertise and what she's talking about.
All right, so good question. So there's all these great ingredients, and there's a plethora of them. There's hundreds of new ingredients that are constantly being discovered and brought to market. The big question is, yeah, it's a great ingredient, but just because it's a great ingredient doesn't mean people want it. And part of the time it is because they don't understand it. Other part of the time is it's just not relevant. So one of it is cultural relevance. Because water is in yet another iteration, and there's actually a water 5.0, which if I started talking about that right now, I'd completely lose you and blow your minds because there's some far out stuff going on with all kinds of things like programmed water. But the cultural relevance of water is very strong. Cultural relevance of bread is very strong. Cultural relevance of bars is very strong. So there's different ways to think about whether or not an ingredient can just be dropped into culture or if it's going to require a ton of work to try and explain it. And is it health benefit? Is it a quality play? There's a lot of questions there that are surrounding how people make decisions. So when you look at how people are making decisions about whether or not it's the right idea for them, one is social media. Obviously, you cannot get away from it. Especially with the millennials, they are massively plugged in. I've got some stats if anybody wants them of how many hours they're spending on their phones and basically looking up product information, texting friends. I mean, it's a crazy number of hours every day. It's also what's the status and identity, and that has a lot to do with the branding. What do they want to walk around and carry? The bread? Maybe not so important. What they're carrying around with that pure maple water, very important. So part of it's also, is it an on-stage product where they're going to be seen with it, like a Kind bar out in public, and people are like, ooh, what are you eating? As opposed to something that they're having in their home. Though even those little distinctions, on-stage or off-stage, make a big difference in whether or not the product or the brand is relevant. Their personal values, of course, is it sustainability? Is it health? Is it clean? What are some of those things that are actually motivating them and make them feel connected to the concept? And obviously food culture. How relevant is it in food culture? Is it completely behind? Or is it ahead of the curve? The product attributes and the brand attributes is where everything needs to line up. And that is what's going to help you determine whether or not you're playing in the right competitive landscape, and also whether or not you are in an existing product category or you're actually creating a new product category. So I'm going to break this down. High fructose corn syrup. This is like a game of telephone. If you look at culture, demonized ingredients sort of take a ride. High fructose corn syrup wasn't on anyone's radar. And then the really hardcore health and wellness consumers, which make up about 10% of the total population, started thinking and hearing and saying, ooh, that high fructose corn syrup, that's not good. It's a health concern. So they started telling their friends, and they started telling their friends, and they started looking at products and started reading labels and started transitioning off of brands that included the ingredient. As it started trickling out to what I'm calling the periphery, which is the other far edge of the health and wellness consumers, the ones who are trying to quit smoking and best cigarettes like after the 5-mile walk. That group, they're not as much interested about high fructose corn syrup as a health issue. They don't know, they just heard it's bad. They don't know what it does. They don't know why they should be concerned. They don't even know what it's in. It's just bad. And so for them, it becomes a conversation not about whether it's healthy or unhealthy necessarily. It's whether or not the product is a high quality or it's a low quality. And so over the years, we've seen a lot of products start to symbolize not just a healthy or unhealthy product, but also whether it's a high quality or a low quality product. And it's not just high fructose corn syrup. It's GMOs, soy, sugar, saturated fats. I mean, we could go through a very long list where you see it, and it starts at that core, it pulls itself out, and it literally is. There's like a loss of translation as it gets out to the mainstream and to those who are less involved with things like health. It can also go the other way. So while it can also take an ingredient down, it can also celebrate or re-celebrate an ingredient. Think about butter. You know, butter was really, really good and super high quality, and then it became a bad, low quality and something to stay away from for health reasons. Now it's making a resurgence. It's coming back. Same thing can be said for meat. Again, we could probably put 5 or 10. Lard is starting to come back. There's all kinds of different products. Lard's not coming back because it's healthy. Lard's coming back because there's a different orientation to fats, and there's also a different orientation to what makes high quality in terms of food and food production, what's more real, what has more meaning, what has more history. So there's all sorts of things wrapped up in that social influence. And the thing with the millennials is they are so plugged in, they're really susceptible to having tons and tons and tons of information, and usually it's wrong. So whatever is out there in the public sphere, that's what they're hearing, and then they're the experts in it. So it could be wrong, could be right. So there's just a ton of confusion. So part of it is, what's the meaning? What's the meaning of baobab? Like, baobab's a new emerging category. It's from a baobab tree that's in Madagascar that hangs and it dehydrates itself in the pod, and they're naturally harvesting, sustainably harvesting the powders, and it's really high in fiber, and it's all these things. But what meaning are we playing into, and how successful can this actually be in the marketplace? Or is this going to be a tiny little niche product that's never going to make its way out for various reasons? And that's what we try and start working through, is what's the meaning? So what's missing? Let's just take a really obvious example. So here's high fructose corn syrup writ large, along with a lot of other things that consumers are cringing about. Caramel color and red 40s and all these things that are hanging out there. The reality is that the true Lipton consumer, who is really brand loyal, and they don't care. They don't care. They like the taste. They like the way that this product tastes, and they keep drinking it. It's the right price. They can get it. It's convenient. They can get it in volume if they want to. And it's just a commodity product. Thing is that consumer base is shrinking because not very many people are subscribing to this being okay. And it's not just because it's seen as an unhealthy beverage. I mean, tea as a category is seen as a healthy alternative, right? I mean, it's imbued with all sorts of meaning around health and good things. But even if Lipton tried to do an organic Lipton or clean up this ingredient profile, their consumers still don't care. They're not going to buy more. It's not going to move the needle, and all of a sudden they're going to feel better about it and buy even more. And they can't move the needle because the other consumers, which are probably about 60% of the population, are moving in a different direction. They're moving into this direction. This is where we're starting to see things start to need to get cleaned up. And there's different orientations about not only just the basics, like on here it's treated water. They don't know what that means. And it just says tea. Let's see, where is it? Tea. Like, what kind of tea? That's a huge category that has a ton of distinctions. At least this is a brewed tea. So they're trying to make some distinctions in an otherwise, similar product to product. Organic cane sugar, organic lemon juice. So part of it is, the right idea is a ready-to-drink tea. First problem is the ingredients are all wrong because they've missed the meaning and what's important in purchase decisions. So that's the stuff consumers can talk about. Usually they'll say, oh yeah, well look at, I can see these ingredients. And by the way, consumers usually only read the top 3 ingredients, and they might skim down to the bottom to see if it's anchored by a red 40. The length of the ingredient list is most important, even beyond that. So if the top 3 ingredients are confusing, and you're doing something like treated water, high fructose corn syrup, and tea, if the first 2 are confusing, and the second one is a bad ingredient, you've completely lost them before you even get into some of the other aspects. So if you're in product development, if nothing else, try and get the first 3 ingredients right. No, here, not here. Here. Hi, honey. No, that's just that's the timer. So I guess we are pushing on time. I don't know how much time we have. So here, I'm going to start moving more quickly so we don't lose time. So it's more than just the ingredients. It's just a tad sweet. totally on trend in food culture. It's honest. The name in itself is hugely symbolic, right? I mean, it's transparent, it's real, it's good. It's tea. And tea, if you start to sit down with consumers and you start talking about what they're seeing, they start all of a sudden talking about truth. And it's truth with a capital T. And then they're like, oh, tea, like tea, I get it. And so there's some interesting symbolism that starts to get wound up into even just how they're using some of the cleverness of the graphics. The color palette, if you start breaking that down, the white background is completely about purity. It's about honesty. It's about trust. Yellow is completely about cleanliness and integrity and relationships. And you get into greens, that's often about love and naturalness and sort of a nurturing kind of feminine quality to it. The spacing, there's a lot of white space. They're not completely, gobbling up every aspect, which starts to signify things like it's simple. It's a simple product. They don't need to say a lot about it. They don't have to shout at you or scream at you. They use the USDA seal of approval right here, but then they double it up to make sure it hasn't been missed by saying it's an organic lemon tea. So again, using some linguistic cues to start to trigger to the consumer that this is a really high-quality product. And then lastly, if you start to look at packaging, it's really tremendous how much packaging plays a role. This packaging is a very round but subtle, kind of a little bit of curve. It's a very a gentle female kind of a shape, which is very different than a lot of other RTD products that are on the shelves. But it's not so feminine that he's going to feel awkward drinking it. It's not, it's definitely a little more for her, but it's still friendly enough for him to drink it as well. So what do you do when you have a category that doesn't even exist? Has anyone heard of farmer's cheese? You guys, out of anyone in the world, you guys would. But this is the 2% of the population. Most people don't. They have no idea what farmer's cheese is. It's a wholly new category, basically void of meaning in general. Well, a really nice couple came to us to work on a project and wanted to bring some interesting products that they had seen over in Latvia, where really farmer's cheese is primarily born. And they wanted to bring it out to the U.S. marketplace. And what we see with the product is, in terms of its texture, it's a fresh curd cheese that's typically enrobed with chocolate. And the branding is usually really candy-based. Everything looks like kind of almost cartoony and really kooky and funky. And it's largely positioned towards children, and it's excessively sweet. I mean, super, super sweet and loaded with crap ingredients. So when they brought it, Mark and I were like, whoa, this could be an interesting product category for a lot of reasons, if you cleaned it up. So we were all interested in that, and also thinking about how to write a couple of important trends that are happening. So having worked with folks like Kraft and Sargento and Tillamook and some smaller kind of dairy or cheesemakers over the years, we knew that we had to adapt it to the U.S. marketplace, and that was going to be a bit of a challenge. What we thought was interesting is, one is dairy is experiencing a resurgence. I'm sure you guys know about that. There's a whole new orientation for the consumer to come into the category, so the meaning is experiencing kind of a new surge and uplift. So that was good. There's also some really important trends in how people are eating called snackification. So it's away from that 3 square meals and into multiple snacks. So there were some interesting trends happening, and we also knew that the product was going to be playing off of naturally low fat and low calorie. And anything that's inherently natural to a product right now has the best functional opportunities with consumers. It satisfies the function and the meaning at the same time. It was also just nailing the high protein trend that was relevant for kids and for adults. We were kind of lucky in that it was called farmer's cheese because it has a lot of natural symbolism and it connects to a sense of people, place, process. So there's a lot of really rich meaning just in the product category name on its own. So we took it out to consumers. And, when you put a little thing that looks like a chocolate bar in front of a consumer, they're like, okay. They tried it and they loved it. They really loved it, but they didn't know what it was. And it's kind of like Chicken Kitty here. It's like, I'm not what I look like. So we said, okay, ethnographic research is good because usually you're putting it in some sort of a context where they're going to have their own use occasions. So we said, all right, we're going to have to create the meaning for them. There's no meaning, or the meaning is weird and it's confusing. So every choice that we were going to make in terms of the development of this was going to be really critical, and it was going to help us understand what the competitive set was and also how we could inspire some trial. So we started doing more work and started talking to consumers about occasions. That's usually where they can start thinking, oh, well, after I've tried it, when would I eat it? So they start trying to go there. With some help from us, we were able to start getting them a little further along. We start talking about things like exterior, the flavor, the form, the brand, the price, the retail. This is where the rubber meets the road, right? And this is where it all starts to happen and where we have to figure out where the product and the product meaning and the experience all have to sync up, or it's not going to make any sense to them. It's going to be a total miss. So what we first found is that it's really well suited as an adult evening treat. Fabulous, right? It's got all these different characteristics. They want a dark chocolate and kind of decadent and a mid-sized bar, and it's a very serious, kind of elegant experience, right? It's her on the couch. It's like a Dove Bar commercial, It's all warm and scripty and flowery and feminine, and it's got all these really kind of romantic ideas attached to it. And she says, I think I'd see it in the frozen desserts, maybe in the deli. Great. We totally had the brand, we had the experience, we had the context, we had the emotional values, the symbolic values. Kept going, digging. Then we had this come up. Oh, it's a kid's snack. I was like, oh, crap, it's a kid's snack, too. That doesn't work. The meaning is completely different. So that's about, nuts on the outside, and it's tasty, but not too tasty, not too much flavor, and maybe a little sweeter, and it's a smaller bite-sized thing. And fun and playful, and so all of a sudden we're starting to think, okay, this is primary colors, and this is active, and it's bold, and it's movement, it's very vibrant and very youthful. Super different brand experiences if you're trying to figure out how to unite the two. Also different product experiences. Because our work is so integrated and because we're dancing together all the time, we were able to get the early prototypes out in the first wave of consumer testing. And I'm talking I think we were in group 2 or 3 or something, just getting into the field with the research. And because we were able to start working together and thinking about the product, the context, the meaning, and how it was supposed to sync up with the brand, we were able to bring very quickly and iterate a new prototype, get it into the groups, and we saved 2 months of trial prototype time for the consumer or for the client. We also saved them probably 2 rounds of additional consumer testing and research, which is a bundle and a lot of time. We also were able to iterate with the consumer and start to really refine how to bridge these gaps between the exteriors, the flavors, the forms. And so we were able to start thinking about how all of those pieces could work together so that we could still appeal to a wider target audience and not get sunk into this little niche category of being an after kind of evening treat for adults, for female adults. So the savings were not, it's not just giving a better product to the consumer, but it's also saving the client a ton of resources. And we were able to start doing the brand work because oftentimes, for better or for worse, the brand work happens the same time as the product's happening. And you've got someone with the ingredient, and then they're all in the kitchens, and then they hire a brand agency, and then the brand agency is running along trying to figure out what the branding is. When they're together like this, you start to really understand what the words are. You start to think about all kinds of things. So this product, and this is all not for prime time. This is on the QT. Yeah. It's right now we might be calling it Yuli. The reason is that Yuli linguistically has a mouthfeel. It feels round and it feels smooth and it has an interesting kind of yummy sound. It's kind of decadent to say. It feels good to say. And there's certain words that feel really good to say, and there's other words that do not feel good to say. So you have to start thinking about it. But there's certain words that have a real hard edge. This is a very soft, round experience, and it mimics the product. The shape of the logo is also something that mimics the product. It's mimicking kind of a nice, round, curvy, curd shape. It's also mimicking the bar shape, and they have some other products that might have some interesting kind of roundness to them. If you start looking at package design, and this is totally a mock-up, so you'll have to look and see what we end up with on the shelves, but just for the sake of this presentation, starting with the white, starting with that back purity, the creaminess, the textures, the things that conjure up things around the dairy category. We also have a Y, which is part of the Yuli, that's a really soft imprint on the background. And I don't know if you ever looked at like a Louis Vuitton bag or something, but it's got this kind of repetitive print that's sort of in the background that conjures up signs of quality and distinctiveness. And for her, that's important because we're still trying to position this as a premium product, but not so premium that kids wouldn't be able to enjoy it. From there, we want to start overlaying some things that are going to help reground it back to natural, because this is a totally natural functional product that has really high quality benefits. We also wanted to bring it more into emotion and things that are more raw and more in their pure form. We needed to also ground the whole design because it's so round and because it's so feminine. We also wanted to create some sort of a block that would start to anchor the product and give us some space to talk more about the actual product itself. And the color blocks are things that we're using to also do some indications on product flavors and varietals as we start getting out into a broader line. But we also wanted to not make it too premium, and we didn't want it to come off as being overly processed, because the fact is the packaging, they can't do transparent packaging. There's all kinds of guardrails on what we can and can't do and what's cost effective or what's possible given the way the product is created and needs to be stored. So we needed to bring it back to this idea of the farm and try and give them something that was more distinctive and brought it back to a sense of place and a sense of production that was more in the kind of the artisanal style. So when you pull everything together, and again, this is a mock-up and it's not perfect, and you can love it or hate it. But the point being, whatever you do with the package design, what you do with the brand design, it needs to come back to that sense of meaning and how those occasions are stacking up, what the emotions and moods and contexts are associated with that. And as you start to build your product, start building your brand alongside it, and you start to tell a consistent story from top to bottom and side to side. So again, I think where we're at in this process is we're just about finished with the presentation, but the right product and idea could be ingredient, but it also might be that unarticulated need for what it is that's missing in their lives and what's meaningful to them. The strategy needs to align with consumer culture and also what trends are happening. And that's how we do it, is through the research. We also do the testing and the brand development. But again, it's all woven into the prototype development. So all of this in its total is the actual experience itself. And we completely integrate them throughout. And then the commercialization into market pieces, we also do a very integrated approach on that, everything from the collateral build to helping them think about how to show up at Expo. So basically, that's how we go about doing it and creating some meaningful experiences. And I'm going to let Mark wrap it up.
So, you want to make products that rock and are legal. At least in the state of Washington, they're legal. That particular product might not have a lot of meaning to mainstream consumers, but if they eat enough of it, it might. Thank you all very much for your kind attention. Really enjoyed providing the presentation.
We'll have a question and answer period. So if anyone has any questions, we'll start in the back.
So when doing product innovation, where do you draw the line as far as cost and maintaining the quality of the product?
That's a great question. From a product development standpoint, we have a process, a product development process. I mean, you saw it on the screen with the round shapes, and I mean that was just a very general schematic. But one of the very important, maybe the most important part of a project is before we even start doing anything, we do what's called a project scope. And for those of you who use any kind of a stage gate model or a set model of product development, you know that the project scope is really where you're defining what your guardrails are, what your constraints are in the project. It's very, very important to understand that. And right at the point where we're understanding what all those constraints are and defining what the project wants to be, we're really undertaking an initial feasibility study. So whether it might be a packaging feasibility, a cost feasibility, a manufacturability, we're really looking at where are all the pain points going to be in this project? What do we really have to pay attention to specifically before we even get on the bench and start concepting? And look, that is what you guys bring to the table as culinologists. Bringing that art, being really creative on the concept end of things, but also bringing that science in right at the beginning. That is really a fundamental advantage of being a culinologist, because you're not going to be concepting, things that are out of bounds, things that are not feasible. You already kind of have the playpen drawn around what you need to create as a product, because you've got that whole brain that's got both sides of the equation. That's a good question.
I was just curious, going back to the clean design where manufacturers aren't calling out specific claims, is there any concern that that's going to cause an unfair playing field? Just because you're not able to regulate certain looks or styles?
Do you want to try to?
I'm just trying to understand.
From a packaging standpoint?
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand a little more. Can you
So
just talk
basically,
about
like the maple water, there wasn't any specific claims about the phytonutrients and some of those things. It's kind of more about the overall look to communicate to the consumer. Mm-hmm. So is there any concern that maybe companies are going to come out with these really pretty innovative, clean designs on their packaging to try to make their product look healthy when in fact it's not?
Oh, they already do that. They're everywhere. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. And I think, interestingly, things that used to look healthy, I don't know if you guys remember all this, but if you go back, it started off with primarily with just organic, right? I mean, everything all of a sudden started having brown craft wrapping paper. I mean, it was all browns and muted colors and pretty bland, and that was supposed to look healthy. Where you start looking at a lot of the product ingredient stuff, they were not at all. They were completely loaded with all sorts of things. So the consumer's kind of onto that. They're a little more sophisticated than that these days. I think that some of those tactics or techniques might have been more important or more persuasive even 10 or 15 years ago, because there wasn't such a huge brand proliferation 15 years ago. It was all large CPG for the most part, and then all of a sudden it was either really small and tiny and kind of artisanal, or it was natural. But now there's so much competition in pretty much every category that the consumer's past just saying, oh, that looks like a clean label, it must be healthy. It does have some symbolic influence for sure. It leads them in that direction, but if they're really concerned about health, they'll turn it over and look. They're more interested, like I was saying before, in the quality. And does that cue up that this is a quality product? And then if they're worried about the health stuff, they'll turn it over and take a look at the ingredient profile.
Who do you think's trying to pull the wool over the consumer's eyes more? Big CPGs that are putting out products that look healthy, or little entrepreneurs that have tremendous passion about their products and are putting these products out in the market because it's what I believe in. People are like me. They're gonna want to buy this product. Which one's more likely to try to pull the wool over the consumer's eyes? Yeah, I mean, everybody intuitively knows that, right? It's not even a question. Mm-hmm. And that's where that trust is.
Who's more likely to be successful at it?
It's a good question. It's a complicated question. But who's losing market share? Whose companies are shrinking? Who's being forced into mergers? Who's being gobbled up by private equity? Well, everybody's being gobbled up by private equity. That's a stupid question.
Hi, I had a question about when you're opening a new product category. So, for example, in the farmer's cheese, is the branding and packaging more important to educate the consumer about what might be inside that package, or is it more important to rouse the consumer's curiosity to try it without even knowing what it is?
More the latter. The problem is that when you're at shelf, you've got about 2 seconds to make an impact. So if you decide to go down the path of trying to educate them by the label rather than creating something like the maple water, I mean, it is a very almost perhaps too stark of a design, but it's an attention grabber. And when you're standing there at the shelf set and you're in the wherever they might get placed, maybe in a functional water category, it's that package has to pop. It has to be the first thing that looks new, that looks different, because that's how they're purchasing. That's how what they're looking for is interesting brands. That's what's been most important to them, and the package design is most important to them. So it's in the decision hierarchy. It's more like brand, which has a lot to do with obviously imagery and package design itself. Then you start getting into some of the other dimensions, and information is about number 3 or 4 out of 5. So
Which means don't load up the package with romance text. People just try to say everything on a package, and it comes off being unauthentic. So it's almost the unbrand that's going to get the attention in some cases.
Some categories, that's true. Yeah.
My question is on the food service side. You talked about the Oreo. How I don't work for any big companies, but I'm just curious. Oreo, you don't really resonate healthy product, organic flour, sugar with cookies. But QSR chains have been serving burgers for years. But, lately I've seen all these burger chains that are very driven fresh patties, organic beef, hormone-free beef, no antibiotics. But young generation likes that. Burger is not healthy, but they would rather spend $2 more, $3 more, and then go buy burgers that are freshly made and beef raised with antibiotics and hormone-free.
Yeah.
So maybe I'm just saying, if you can take an existing product that consumers already like and know, necessarily not healthy, but if you can make it better, I think there are consumers that would buy it. You've done research, so you know better.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to connect those two bridges.
You're raising a huge point. So there's a couple things. Let's talk about organic for 2 seconds. So organic, there's an adoption pathway that the consumer goes through. There are certain categories where organic is really important, and there's certain categories where it doesn't mean jack. So if you look at most organic consumers, the adoption pathway goes something like this. Milk. That's where they're gonna spend the extra money. They're gonna go out of their way to find the organic product because that's what they're feeding their kids, and they're drinking it in high frequency, high amounts. Then it might be something like it could be maybe an organic cheese, perhaps, or an organic bread. The further you go along that pathway, cookies are like way out here because the occasion for consuming a cookie, they're not feeding them 5, 10, 15 Oreo cookies a day. They're feeding them maybe 1 a day at best, and they'd like to not feed them Oreo cookies because they don't feel good about them in the first place, and organic's not going to make a difference. So part of it is finding the relevance to the category and where those attributes need to be dialed in. There's also a huge difference between what happens inside the home and what happens outside the home. Inside the home is where she's got all her control. It's all right here, and she's like, I'm going to gatekeep everything that I want to gatekeep, and in certain categories that, like I said, are more important than others. When they go out of the home, all bets start to kind of get off the table, right? I mean, all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, there's that. Fresh is more important than organic, so and quality is more important than organic. So you're not going to see McDonald's try and do an organic patty anytime. Probably ever, is my guess. Well, first there's a supply chain issue, but there's other things too. But the fact, even McDonald's tried to introduce an Angus beef burger last year, or maybe like late the year before, dead on arrival. Just didn't do a thing. They ended up having to jump and go back to their usual stuff. Consumers are just not willing to pay for that in that context, in that occasion, and within that brand. The McDonald's brand halo is so entrenched in culture. It's going to be very, very difficult for them to shift that. And so they've got to do it in different ways. It's got to be more a fresh play. They're not going to get a lot of credit for trying to do organic or natural because the consumer just doesn't care. They don't care in that context. So it's really complicated, but that's as brief as I can make it with the amount of time we have. But that's how the behavior
But everything
works.
we talked about in the context of all of this presentation was obviously retail, but you brought up food service, which was really great.
Yeah.
This is playing out in food service, same way. I spent 30 years in food service. It's playing out in food service in the same way. And what I would say is food service has been much slower on the uptake, much slower. Retail has taken back the lead in terms of innovating. Notwithstanding the kind of presentation we saw the day yesterday with the keynote, where there's these top creative restaurants are doing amazing things, but most of food service, QSRs, fast casual. Not much happening. I mean, Chipotle's just like kind of run out there, and Panera, and just a few others, but not many. Not many. They're stuck. They're really stuck.
All right. Well, great presentation. Thank you very much. My question is, well, first of all, I develop products for an upscale grocer, and we do a bazillion SKUs a year, very current, very relevant. However, I was pretty intrigued by the Lipton slide. And we have some legacy items that we would be crucified for if we took them off the menu, but they contradict everything else in the set. Is there an evaluation or process or any type of mindset you take in looking to that Lipton type example?
Definitely.
Other than just watch it slowly die?
Yeah, definitely. That's another great question.
Which is happening.
Yeah, it is. Their sales decreased again in the last couple of years in a row. But yeah, I think there's a lot of different ways to look at it. And it's kind of related back to what I was saying before. There are certain categories in certain occasions where the consumer is going to care more about what brands you have. And there's certain categories where brands are really important, like chips, soda. Like, if they want a Pepsi, they want a Pepsi. If they want a bag of Cheetos, they want a bag of Cheetos. And they don't want the natural version. There's going to be a really tiny little sliver that wants the natural Cheetos puffed, But it's going to be, like 10%, 15% of the overall category sales. It's not going to be anything that's going to rock anyone's world. So there are certain categories you've got to keep it. And it will probably be like Betsy. You'll put her out to pasture at some point because she will die a slow death, and then she might get kitschy enough to come back in a few years if you clean the label up. But there's going to be a sequence there, and it also depends on your brand halo. So I don't know what brand you're working for, but if your brand is high quality enough and is seen as a leader and high quality, consumers will give it a little bit of a pass. They're kind of like, well, if it's good enough for them, I guess, all right. Whole Foods has been, I worked with them for a decade. And I'll tell you, there's a lot of categories that are in that store where they're not healthy. They're maybe not as high quality as you would expect. The consumer's like, oh, if it's good enough for them, it's good enough for me. And so there's some of that goes on too, although less or so. It's more about what's the occasion, what are you trying to hit on, and what does that category look like in general. But there's definitely a method to the madness. You can figure it out.
Sometimes rather than a repositioning, which can be done around the periphery, if you have the brand permission to do it, it's a cash cow. It's a strategy. We're not putting any money into it.
Yeah.
We're just going to milk it and ride it as long as we can and let it support other innovation and other things we're doing. That's a legitimate strategy in a corporate portfolio.
Yeah.
Quick question. You mentioned in the retail space you have literally 2 seconds for the consumer to evaluate and make a decision on certain things.
Yeah.
What is that time frame in the quick service or fast casual space with a restaurant?
Depends on how long the line is.
Yeah.
The thing with quick, especially QSR, not as much in fast casual. You get a little more time because they're in a different mode. They're looking for something that's more distinctive. They're probably looking for things that have different flavor profiles, different ingredients. It's a little better for you, kind of an experience. QSR, it's super habitual. I mean, it is so repetitive, it's crazy. I mean, they drive up and it's like, I want a number 2. They don't even think about it. And it has been so ingrained in their patterns for so many years. The younger groups who are just starting to, do their own ordering, there's a little bit of that experimental time, but it's the way that the menu boards are designed now and the way that things are clustered, it's such a quicker process. If everything was a la carte, you probably have, maybe even a minute or not a minute, but a minute per decision. But when it's all bundled up and they're just in and out, they're not coming to sit down and enjoy and dine in and relax. Most people want to drive through QSR because they don't want to go inside and eat inside because the restaurant sucks. So. Yeah, well, we rode around. We did a study for McDonald's years ago, and what we found is we were driving with consumers. Like, we literally were in their car, and we drive to the restaurant. They'd say, hey, page us. We're going to the restaurant. We drive through. They'd order, and we thought, okay, now where are we going? Where are you going to go eat this? And they just pull off in the parking lot and ate it in their car. And we're like, why? What are you doing? And they're like, well, I'm not going in there. But it's like this totally, it's a totally habitual, like I'm getting the number 2, I need to eat, I need to fuel up. And this is not about, ooh, what do they have today? What's fresh? What's interesting? What's tasty? They're not expecting that. So it's just a different context. So in terms of precise times, it kind of depends on who's doing it and for what occasion, but it's much faster at QSR than anywhere else. Yeah.
Okay, that's about all the time we have. That was
Thank you.
Great information, great presentation. Let's have a big hand for Michelle and Mark.